Greetings and salutations. This is Vince Robinson. It is my pleasure and honor to be here this morning. It's kind of unusual for me to be live on YouTube and Facebook at 11 on a Monday, but I have a very special reason for doing that. It is my guest, Dr. Bertice Berry. We were just having some conversation, and it's really ironic that our lives are like mirroring each other in reverse. So when I left, she came, so many synchronicities in reverse, but I'm so pleased to have you. So welcome to Open Door Live, Dr. Berry.
Thank you so much, Vince. I'm Bertice. You know that.
Yeah, I know. I just, I like to give it because it's due. You
Yeah,
earned it at an early age
yeah,
as well. I read that you got your PhD at the age of 26. How does that happen?
yeah. You go straight through. You focus on nothing but that. You don't let anything else distract you from what it is that you set out to do, and that's all you do.
Okay. Well, it worked. It
Yeah,
worked.
yeah.
So
I
since we're
don't
on the
know if I would recommend that other people do it that way, but it definitely worked for me. Yeah.
okay. So since I opened the conversation with that, let's talk about your years at Kent State University and what led to you coming to Kent.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was the first in my family to even go to college, and I don't mean siblings. I mean cousins, aunts, uncles. Nobody in the Freeman clan had been to college, so going to undergrad was a huge thing. I went to school in Jacksonville, in Jacksonville, Florida, Jacksonville University, and it was a fluke. I wanted to go to college. I was going to go to wherever my friends were going to school because I didn't know how to pick a school. And my counselor knew of JU, and she took the information of my other applications and sent off an application to JU. And that's the school that accepted me with a full ride and assistance and what have you. So after getting there, I thought, well, this worked out so well. Let me use some random sampling. And so I had all these catalogs and all loads of places I wanted to go to, and then some who with people I wanted to study under. But again, you don't really have a sense of it. No one in your family, like I said in my family, I'm going to graduate school, and they said, we thought you already graduated. So there's no sense of how that's supposed to work. So I had this carpet that didn't go all the way in my room. I took all the catalogs and I threw them, and I said, the ones that end up on the floor part will be the ones that I fill out and I send off. And then the first one that I hear from will be the one that I go to. Well, I really wanted to go to Oklahoma. I just really wanted to go there. There was somebody there I wanted to study with. Wanted to go to Michigan, all that. I heard from Kent State first, and Kent State came with a full package and research. You know, I could be a researcher. I could do all these things, and so that's how I ended up at Kent State.
Okay. And what was it about sociology that interested you?
Mm. Sociology was again one of those things. Sometimes your life will lead you, and you have to be open to allowing it to do so. I wanted to initially I was going to study social work. I wanted to be a chemical engineer as a child, and there was this program where you would get partnered with whatever field you wanted to work in. And I was supposed to start my job with this chemical engineer. I had braided my hair, my little cornrows were perfect, perfect, perfect. I had this linen blouse that I used my cleaning money to go buy this linen top. I get there, the secretary is what they were called then. The secretary says your hair is not professional and your blouse is wrinkled, and so you can't have this job. Now, she was not the chemical engineer, she was not in charge of it. So I have to walk back to the office there in Wilmington, Delaware to get a new job placement. And the only thing that was left was a file clerk in the food stamp office. I started working there. And because I had been cleaning houses from the time I was 12 in the morning and banks on weekends and after school, because I had been doing all that work really hard, hard work was normal to me. So I would file away whatever needed to be done and be done early. So I started reading through the files, and I'd see places where they'd missed, they'd given somebody something they shouldn't have, or they didn't, or they denied somebody something they should have. And so I started keeping a little log of this. And one day the boss caught me doing this. And instead of saying, this is not what you're supposed to do, this is not your job, she encouraged me towards sociology and research. She said, what I do, I'm putting a Band-Aid on the problem. And if you go into sociology, you can do the research that sets policy to change the problems. So that's a long way into how I got to sociology.
Okay. When you were at Kent, did you ever cross paths with Oscar Ritchie Hall?
Of course.
Okay.
Like, you can't be a Kent and not cross paths or cross the threshold or live in Oscar Ritchie Hall. I lived there. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any Dr. Edward W. Crosby musings that you could share with us this morning?
Yeah, actually, I have just written a book called Black World. It's about a corner of heaven where you can go to commune with those who are living or dead to learn their insight and interest and information. You can learn all the things that they know and then come back and create something new. And before Dr. Crosby passed, I put him in Black World. And there are many stories that I have about him, but the one that really rings in my memory, and the one that I wrote in this story, it was a time when Dr. Naim Akbar was visiting Kent, and he was giving a lecture, and I'd gone there for the lecture, and Dr. Crosby was introducing him. And in his introduction, he talked about how Dr. Akbar was this person who didn't just write or talk Black, he lived Black. And that it was more than just this thing of what we talk about. It was what we live and who we are. And you know, he lived that with his wife Shirley and his family, and he lived that in the community. To think that he had, you know, like, his background was in German. He was a German language specialist. And then he creates this other thing. It's really amazing how that happens, that you can live this thing and study something else, or come to understand something else, but then find your voice over here. So that exchange just rings true for me. I am sorry, I am in the South, where I'm going to move this a little closer, where sometimes your lawn people come on a day that wasn't their regular day, because that's when they had off. And so it might get a little bit loud here. I apologize.
That's all right. My next door neighbor has hired a tree surgeon to perform surgery on a tree that's extending into her backyard. So I'm waiting for them to pull up in my driveway and start with the with the saws and whatnot. So I understand.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. As long as folks can hear and see us, I think it will be good. And for some reason, your picture just improved dramatically, because it was kind of choppy. So now it's better. And I think now more folks are tuned in. So yeah, I just thought it was important to acknowledge Dr. Crosby. He transitioned not long ago.
Yeah.
And
he
had an impact on so many people.
So many people, so many lives. And this field of study. Black History Month is a month because of Dr. Crosby. You know, there are lots of things that people don't know and don't realize came from there and were influenced by his work. But you know, it's up to us to keep that library open.
Mm-hmm. So I'm fascinated by your interest in sociology. You know, when I was at Kent, I can remember taking a class. It was probably the only sociology class that I took. And I think the instructor was someone from India. And he was talking about degrees, and he said, well, you can get your BS, you can get your MS, or you can get your PhD. And he said, the BS is mo-ish, the MS is, no, the BS is BS, the MS is mo-ish, and then PhD is piled high and deep. So at that point, I don't know that I was disinterested, but that left an impact on my brain. But in later in life, I would come to think about folks who were involved in sociology and think that they had such compassion for their fellow men. And when I look at what you do, the inspirational aspect of you, I know that you do it with the intention of being able to positively impact the lives of others. So I guess I'm coming back to the question of why sociology and what you expect to be the impact of your work as a sociologist.
Yeah, so my work as a sociologist is known as public sociology, right? So that I am taking concepts and ideas of sociology to the public. Um, Sociology, it's interesting that you find sociologists to be compassionate people. Sometimes we hang around and we're so critical of ourselves and of our work, and I think that that's probably true of most people in academia, that we orchestrate or we design the compassion out just to try to um, get to the answer. But I believe that you can't get to the answer without having some fun or some joy or some hope for life. And if you do, if that's the way it has to be done, then I don't want a part of it, because I grew up hard. I grew up in a hard environment. And as a child, I promised myself that, when people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I go, happy, because it was like a job that nobody I knew had. And it was something that I chose. And so if I can't do the work of a sociologist as someone who brings hope, right, then I'm a part of the problem. Then I'm not doing it right. If the goal is to get to a better world, let's be better on our way to it. If the goal is to get to a world where everybody feels like they belong, let's start including people on our way to it. If the goal is to get to a place where there is equity, then let's start doing that on the way to it. And it's not just, money isn't everything. I mean, I grew up in a household where my mother every day said, money is not only is it not everything, but with money, you can't get the things that you should be striving for. And so strive for those. And I think sometimes we put too much power in one thing, not recognizing the power that we can have in our own self.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious too, as someone who navigates that field and observing others who deal with those circumstances. Is there ever a point where you become numb, so to speak, because you are witnessing so much in terms of people's hardships, and you have to process that. And to a certain extent, I think in order to survive, you have to separate yourself from it emotionally.
Yeah, no, I don't separate myself from it emotionally. In fact, like my emotions are my sixth sense. And I need those as my reminder to turn my boat in the right direction. Right. So no, what I do is there's a whole lot of joy, a whole lot of laughter. It's why I went into comedy for the period of time that I did nothing but comedy. It is to show people the flip side of that coin called irony, that on the other side there is laughter. And that's what, in my opinion, Black folk have been so really good at, that we are able to create the most beautiful music out of the most tragic pain. That we can, laugh at the insanity of the situation that we find ourselves in. That is remarkable. And everybody should want to say, how do I learn that? How do I do that? But I think, I'm a mom, 5 adopted children, all born fetal alcohol and crack addicted. And whatever I learned by the time I was 26 from that PhD. I had to go back to school to see all of the differences that they had in their ways of learning and what they needed, and then how to make sure I was, able to give it to them and to myself at the same time. So, yeah, you know, we we create space to be together and apart, to be the mystic in the morning and, the party person in the afternoon or whatever it is. But yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into that, but I don't ever take my emotions out of
Okay. Interestingly enough, I listened to a piece on NPR yesterday about a woman who was working in a hospital as a physical therapist. And because of the pandemic, she got drafted into being a phlebotomist. And she talked about how she would come into the patient's room and, she would be bright and cheerful. And she understood that they were sedated, but she wanted to give them something positive. And
it.
she
Right.
said over a certain period of time, she kind of changed her approach, and she became emotionally distant for whatever reason. So I was just thinking about that as I asked the question.
Yeah.
But you opened the door in terms of talking about being a comedian. How did that happen for you? What happened in your mind and said, well, let me try comedy?
Kent State. Kent State happened. Um, Kent State is like, if you ain't funny in Kent, you ain't gonna make it. You know, I was like trying to turn in a chapter of my dissertation, which was on colorism. And because I didn't watch television and I hadn't been listening to the radio, I had just been writing, 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 writing. I stepped outside and it was a wind chill of 90 below. And this truck came like running up to me. The truck driver pulled up real quick, and he threw his door open and said, "Get in, it's freezing. You're gonna die." And I was like, "I'm gonna die if I get in there."
Hmm.
And so I was, I lived in those Franklin apartments. And so he was like, "No, no, no, you're not supposed to be outside." So I ran back in the house where I was already frostbitten. Um, Kent, I was teaching, and I was teaching intro to social, family, and I was teaching statistics. And you give these brilliant lectures, and people say, "Okay, how much of this is going to be on the test?" And then it occurs to me, you no, you need to teach so that people are engaged and they want to know more. And so I started using humor because I learned that if something was interesting, funny, or bizarre, people were more likely to remember, to learn, and to change. So I started doing that. And my classrooms were packed. People were sitting in on classes that were not registered for my class. I started getting larger halls and things because people found the class not only engaging but entertaining. And one of my colleagues said, he's a guy named Mike Veneman, he's passed away. He said, "You should be a comedian." And I was like, "I'm not a comedian, I'm a scholar." And he was like, "No, you can't be a scholar because you're funny." And so he talked me into going to an amateur night at Hilarities in Cuyahoga Falls. He talked me into doing that. And, like it was like, no. And so I had lost my second Fulbright to a Nigerian coup. And I needed to do something to kind of lift my own spirits. And so I thought I need to do something new. So I gave into doing this, and I did, and found out that amateur night wasn't a bunch of amateurs. It was a bunch of comedians who needed the $50 who were all competing, but I won, and I won the first time out. And then I had incredible mentors like Steve Harvey and Drew Carey and Jeff Foxworthy, and all these were guys who would take me around and show me what to do, what not to do. It moved very quickly from there to, working in universities, and people would say, "You know what, you're so funny, but you're so thought provoking. Can you do a lecture?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, that's kind of what I do." So I do a lecture in the day and comedy in the evening, and then just started infusing the two, and then went to television and stopped doing comedy completely because there was that whole the thing that Dave Chappelle took so long to get to. It took me seconds to get to. Like, I don't know if you laughing with me or at me. but I'm doing this to change the world, to make people think.
Yeah. Well, you know, comedians do have that effect. I mean, if you just look at what Dave Chappelle is doing now and how respected he is, how respected his opinion is, and all that he's gone through. I do have to rewind just a second to just go back to Kent State and the comedian piece, because Arsenio was at Kent,
Yeah.
AJ Jamal was at Kent,
Yep.
Drew Carey was at Kent,
Yep.
Steve at Kent. So you
Yep.
have this pedigree of comics that were birthed, and then there's you. And I'm just imagining you in that lecture hall and having that captive audience and having an ability to infuse the humor. You know, it's such an important skill set to have. And I'm sure that it has benefited you in those corporate boardrooms that you've been standing in and those audiences that you've had.
Yeah.
So you went from there to being in television. So how does that happen?
That's not an accident. Television doesn't discover you. You have to discover them. So I hired an agent. I was traveling so much. The first year I put 150,000 miles on a car. Second year I bought a new car, put 250,000 on it. And I was traveling so much. And I thought, well, you know what? It would be great if I could be in one place and the people come to me. And so I hired an agent to get a television show, and it happened very quickly, and it just kept rolling from there.
Okay. So at some point you left television. Do you have any aspirations to do that again or to continue that?
So let me tell the left television story. I didn't really leave television. Well, I guess I did. I was wearing dreadlocks. I had dreadlocks for about 40 years. I was the first person on nationally syndicated television wearing locks, and daytime television. So, you know, like I'm wearing my hair and everything is fine and wonderful. And at the end of the season, I was asked to cut off my locks and wear a wig so I could look normal. Now, there had been a focus group, a research group of African American women who all said, you know, the show is great, but she needs to fix her hair. Why is she wearing her hair like that? What's wrong with her? Why she got to come out like that? And so they said, if you cut your locks off and wear a wig, we will renew the show and give you your $1 million signing bonus. And if you don't, we'll cancel the show. And so I thought about it for a couple of days, and I realized that if somebody was willing to renew my show with all these seasons promised and give me $1 million in the 90s when a million was really a million, then it was worth something to them for me to not be me. And it should be worth more to me to be me. And so I just made the decision to walk away. I am working on another show right now, and it is being pitched right now. Yeah.
Okay. That's great news. The world is ready. I'm sure of it.
I don't know.
Oh no, they're ready. They're ready. So we've established that you've been a comedian. We've established that you had a television show. Some people know you as a writer. Talk about your trajectory as a writer.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy how that happened. And I think that's my life, a series of how did that happen? The show had just been canceled. I was in Brazil, and I've always been able to kind of like, you know, like hear and live into the spirit realm, which is kind of crazy saying it. I was in Bahia, Brazil, and Bahia is one of those places they say is more African than Africa. And it was as if, you know, part of becoming a sociologist was to move away from that. And so when I went to Bahia, it was like all of it was right back. And I was trying to not see and feel and, you know, be deep about anything or spiritual or anything like that. And it just wouldn't leave. And so one night I dreamt this story, and I woke up and I said, okay, that's it. I will write if I can write these stories, then maybe I won't have to be plagued with all of this ancestral stuff on a daily basis. And so I said, when I get back, I'll find a literary agent and I will get a book deal. It's not the way it's done, and I didn't know that. And so when I got back home, one of the first messages was from a literary agent who had read something that I'd written somewhere and said, you should be doing a book. And I had a book deal before I had written anything. And so since then, I've written and published under my name 11 books, and I've ghostwritten about 30.
Okay. You know, that ghost writing piece is extremely impactful.
I
You know,
love ghostwriting.
yeah.
I love it too much. I love it too much because it is like being a ghost in somebody
Mm.
else's life. You know, you take what they give you and then you kind of see around those spaces, do some research in the area and the time, and then you can give back people sometimes their story in a way that they hadn't even been able to think about it.
Yeah. You know, the other important piece about that is that it empowers people who aren't actually writers to be writers.
Yeah, yeah.
I listened to an interview on Friday, and it was a person who had like 6 or 7 books out. And I'm like, wow. But the same person said that she wasn't good with grammar, she didn't know punctuation and all that. And I'm thinking, well, how can you be a writer if you don't know these things? Well, it's easy. You hire somebody who does, and then you take the credit for their work. So,
Well, yeah, but the other part of that is I really have a problem with people who want to write books but don't read them. Um, it's like you should listen to my story, but I don't want to hear anybody else's. And so I think you should. I think if you're a writer, you should be a reader. Like that part.
mhm. Yeah. And that's something that we are said to not do. But then when you look at the statistics, you will find out that some of the most voracious readers in America are Black women.
Oh no, not some of.
The
The most voracious
Okay.
readers in
Let's
America
set
are
the
Black
record
women.
straight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's set it straight. The highest selling books are, well, number one, spiritual books. Who's buying them? Number two, books buying about Black folk. Who's buying them? So that's a well-kept secret. And yet in publishing, we still, get the back end of a book deal. So yeah, absolutely.
hmm What do you think about the phenomenon that you have a lot of self-publishing right now? People are just going to Amazon and they use the Kindle platform and they put books out. So, what are your thoughts about that paradigm versus the traditional where you get an agent and somebody signs you to a book deal and then
Yeah.
you climb that way?
Yeah, there's many ways to do it, but the thing with a lot of the big publishers is that, they kind of have a monopoly on who gets heard and how they get heard. And so to have access to publish your own work or to work through a small imprint is another one of those things that's leveling the playing field for those who want to write and haven't been able to have voice writing because maybe they're not a Kardashian or whatever. Because right now, a lot of what publishing is people who somebody believes has a lot of followers or views or whatever, and those don't translate into readers. So, it is a good thing if you can find an avenue to have your voice be heard. But I do ask that if people want to have their voice be heard, punctuation is part of
hmm
should be.
Right. So you brought up the idea of reading. Who does Bertice read?
Right now I'm reading some like I typically don't read who. I typically read what. I always am reading a narrative from an enslaved person. There are hundreds and hundreds of stories that were written about slavery by people who lived in slavery. And so I'm always reading or rereading a slave narrative. Always. That's always there. I'm always reading something theological. I'm always reading something scientific. I'm always reading something, something that gives me some hope, that makes me see a little bit different. And then there's always something that's kind of like out there and off. I will always reread J. California Cooper. I will always reread Octavia Butler. I will always reread Frederick Douglass. I will always reread Du Bois. I will always reread. I read Carter G. Woodson every year. There are some books that have like every year I need to read that book. But I'm inspired by um, the lives of folks and ideas of things of people who made it without the access that we have. And I'm always looking through their writings to find the breadcrumbs.
Mm-hmm. So how does their writing affect your writing? You know, as a poet, I was profoundly influenced by Mwatabu Okanta. I don't know if you're familiar with Brother Okanta, but I took the Black Writers Workshop when I was at Kent, and Okanta pulled me to the side and he said, "Hey, brother, you're a poet." I'm like, "Okay." So after I got that from him, I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to write." But then I got to a point where it was difficult for me to read other poets because I didn't want to write the way they wrote. I wanted my voice to be authentic. And then later in life, I came back to say, well, I can see how others write, but I can still have my own voice.
Yeah, you have to establish your voice first. And too often people are emulating what other people do and say. And I keep saying to folks, find your voice. It's okay, like for me to love J. California Cooper and Octavia Butler. It's okay for me to love that. The minute that I find myself sounding like them, then I'm not doing what I was put here to do. And so, when I'm writing a novel, I'm not reading a novel. When I was doing stand up, I wasn't watching comedians. When I was doing television talk show, I wasn't watching talk shows, because it's easy to be pulled into and think, oh, if that's working, that's what I should do. But we are influenced by everything and everyone. The self is social. You're a product of everything that happens to you. When these guys come to cut the lawn here, and I say lawn and it's actually land, when they come to do this land, there's certain people, I like to watch the way they do what they do. Some of them will take the extra brush all the way down to the burn pile. Some of them will throw it on the side of the house. I know watching them, they're not going to be around long because they don't really want to do it. So just copying what somebody does or taking the shortest route, you're not going to do it long. I don't have to be bothered with you in the space because it's not even what you want to do. But you're right. You find your voice and then you listen to and allow, like a conversation. When I'm reading J. California Cooper, I'm having a conversation with her. When I'm reading Octavia, I'm having a conversation with her. When I'm reading, some book on quantum encryption, I'm not having a conversation because I don't know enough to have a conversation. I'm just listening.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, I was also reflecting on having been in the National Poetry Slam. I was on Cleveland Slam team in 2003 and 2004. And when I got back from St. Louis in 2004, I was like, I got to step away because, everybody was sounding like everybody else. Everybody was doing everybody else's poems. And at a point, it was just like input overload. And I had to just push back. And I went through a writer's block where I just didn't want to write anything because it felt like I had already written about it and I couldn't write about it again. But then I had to write something for the Cleveland Clinic. And I reflected on my father's bout with Parkinson's disease and the way he was treated by the VA and all of that. And as I started writing about that, I guess the catharsis just opened me up and I found my voice again and I started writing again. So it was an empowerment that occurred, but I think part of it was because I just had to close things down for a season.
So I have every day I share a story on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, And then as a result, people started writing back to me in the comment section. They'd write back a story that was awakened in them, and write story. We're wired for narrative. If I share a story with you, it wakes up a story in you. And so I created a new page called Stories to Tell with Dr. Bertice Berry. And people started sharing stories, and it took me a while to be able to figure out how to do that, because I had to get rid of the things that I didn't want to create the things that we did want. But I don't like to live my life refuting. But I know in engineering something, you have to kind of engineer away from the thing that's happening. And so one of the things that I said was, tell your own stories. Don't tell anybody else's story. Don't tell what they thought. You can't tell me what somebody else thought. You don't know what they thought. Tell what happened to you, your experience. You could tell your father's experience with Parkinson's and the VA because that was your story. But the minute we try to start doing what everybody else is doing, or talking about what they're talking about, we lose this piece of creativity that just happens naturally through the story. We are wired to do that. It's why your mind hears a story that I'm telling, and you go to, yeah, I was just listening to this thing, and yeah, I just saw this thing, and yeah, this happened. And what we are learning to do on a daily basis is shut that down. People bring their slides and their facts and their figures and their Excel sheet, which I love. I taught statistics. But all stats are doing is gathering a bunch of stories to tell you where the mean is in those stories. The moment we start saying your story's not valid, your story's not valid, that's not important, you lose the connection that story brings. The reason that you were able to write like the wind was you were telling your story, and nobody can get in that lane with you. It's your story. I just did a post right before my niece was like, yeah, I can't moderate around some of this. And I said, then I just have to be honest with people. If they're doing it over there, that's not what we're doing over here. let's what we're doing over here is your authentic self coming to mind, and it just automatically creates something new. It feels like magic, but there's a science to it.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about your move from the West Coast to the East Coast. And I heard you talk about the importance of the slave narratives, and knowing that you live in Savannah and you're near where the Geechee Gullah folks are. Have you had any connection with that whole paradigm? And if so, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, not only are you connected to it, you like live it and walk through it, you hear it, you feel it. I live on the land that was the original 40 acres and a mule allotment that was then taken back. So I can actually read slave narratives and narratives of abolitionists who lived in the area, and then walk where they walked, and listen to the story if it's on Audible, or read it and walk in their footsteps, walk in those same places. And that's powerful. I live about an hour away from Ebo Landing, which is otherworldly. There is no marker or sign, but you can get the coordinates of it and go to that spot. And I went with a friend who's a historian, and my granddaughter, who was about 4 at the time. Yeah, she's 5, just turned 5. And we got out of the car, and she fell to the ground. My granddaughter did. And she's 4 years old. She looks at me and she calls me Googie. And she says, Googie, they're sad. It's sad, Googie. It's sad. And I said, it's okay, baby. And I picked her up and I was just holding her. And she says, it is okay. They're okay. We're okay. And I was like, okay, this is some deep stuff happening right now. But yeah, you can't not know. You can't not feel it. You can't not taste it. And to be in that, there's something really magical and wonderful about it.
So because of that, you have an awareness of African spirituality You know, I've seen some of your inspirational posts, and I know that there is an element of Christianity in that too.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I also realize that there, within our race or within our people, there's kind of a disconnect with our spirituality. Can
yeah.
you talk about how we can marry those two things without conflict?
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody else about this. And I was talking to our mayor about it last night. Um, I'm a part of an Episcopal church, and we were laughing about how, All Saints Day is a big day for us. That remembering that cloud of witnesses. And I remember the first time I go to this church, this woman kept inviting me to this church, and I was like not having anything to do with organized religion, and I was like, no, I'm done with it. I'm done with it. And I go because she just kept inviting me, and I was like, let me just go and get this over with. And so I go to this church, and I walk in, and I'm like, what is going on here? And I remember the guy I was seeing at the time, I called him, and he was like, okay, well, you got that over with. And he was like, and I said, no, I gotta go back. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, something is different. And he said, well, what is it? I said, they look like Downton Abbey and they sound like Malcolm X. It's something. And so I kept going and kind of learning and seeing, but it's a very ancient spirituality that was reserved for the gentry. And so there's a deeper thing that is very different than what I've ever experienced anywhere else. But there is also that piece there that invites in this ancestral remembrance. It's a part of our practice that a year after, that we remember that ancestor who died the year before. That's very African. It's like, what? Y'all do this too? That we lift up that person when they die, that we say their name. Yeah, African spirituality is not, it's kind of like Buddhism. It's not a religion. It's a part of life that we all should be seeking this part of ourself that wants to be higher, that wants to be better, but also knows that it's connected to everything that ever was, that everything that ever is, and that is connected to the ancestors in ways that, you don't think about. I'm like the only neighbor on this land that doesn't have a bottle tree, and they don't look like me, but they have bottle trees. So this is a part of life that Black folks sometimes run away from, and we run away from it into this religion that is not our own. But there's no point of separation for me in the walk that I'm in of my Africanness, in that spirituality. In fact, it is very much the center of it, very much a part of it. Our bishop, Bishop Curry, who is a Black man and a very, very spiritual and very, it just goes against what we think or know. It just doesn't even look like what it should be. Like, how is that possible? And our mayor had been coming to these Bible studies with me on Sunday night, and they're not happening anymore. And he was like, well, what happened to the Bible study? I was going to come to your Bible study. The first time he came, he was like, what's going on up in here? Y'all not sitting around talking about what somebody did. You're going right into theory. Like, yeah. And he was like, well, what? And I was like, newsflash, my Bible from the Episcopal experience includes the Gnostics that are left out of every other one. It's like, what? Like, so yeah. So it's not either or, it's and yeah, and both, all in. Yeah. I don't stop being I don't stop understanding the power of the Orishas when I go to church. It's just not necessary.
Mm. Well, there are a lot of folks out there who are watching this, who will watch it, who know absolutely nothing about Orishas. And you got me with the bottle tree piece because I'd never heard about a bottle tree before. So for the benefit of those who don't know, First the bottle tree, then the Orisha.
Okay, the bottle tree is, oh, you know what? I'm, I have to say to you, Vince, I am a stickler for people doing their own research because they don't come into the knowing with somebody just always telling them. And so I'm going to do two things. I want you to simply Google bottle tree, but then I want you to watch Daughters of the Dust. Okay. So because it's why I don't recommend books to people. It's like if I recommend a book that I love, but you don't love, you're going to stop reading that subject. And it's not that it was a bad book. It wasn't your interest. And so there is this thing, and bottle trees have to do with spirits and collecting the spirits. And then when the wind blows, you hear and you remember. It's a call to remember, to recollect, and to go back. It's that Sankofa, right? So it's an expression of that in the Gullah Geechee culture. And people say that it happens in other parts of the world. I just know about that one. So, but Google it, look at it and see what it does to you. And then when you go out and you see these things in places, you go, oh, wow, I know what that is. That's a different way. Orishas, I want you to look that up too. And then look through all of them and then see which ones kind of speak to you more than others. And then keep going down into that hole, into that practice. We keep giving people answers. And that's kind of this Google world that we're in. You know, like I have access to all the information, but I want you to hand it to me. If I give you the answer to that, you may not find the places and the things that you are called to find. And you have to. And then when you hear Yemo, okay, I'm going to stop. Just go into it, dive into it, explore it, seek it, find out why they call Bahia more African than Africa. Find out more about it. I don't want to say something and you just automatically write it off and go, oh, that's some voodoo. Yeah, but it's called Candomblé in some places. It's called Santeria in others. It's called Yoruba in others. It's called original in others. But we are so locked in the world that we've been in the framework we've been in, that we can't see anything outside of it. And we're afraid to if we do. And yet we're watching reality shows. So that's a whole nother planet.
Well, you know, one of my missions is to bring our folks here closer to their Africanness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons that I asked the question, and I
It's
appreciate.
a great question.
Yeah, and I appreciate your response. I really do. I do have an awareness of Orishas.
I know you do.
Oh yeah, and you know, just like you mentioned earlier, how you say something and somebody relates to what you said, and it takes them to those experiences. I met Barbara O.
Okay.
Who was in Daughters of the Dust years ago, was in the early 90s. And I was also involved in the showing of Sankofa here in Cleveland.
Okay. Yeah.
So we were showing the film and then we were having discussions after the film so people could relate to it. And then a week ago, I interviewed a sister who was in the film Sankofa. Now, this is after having gone to Ghana several times and visiting the Cape Coast slave dungeon. So to hear her say that she was actually in the film, it blew me away. So
right. And so again, when we how do I say this? We have to make it exciting and interesting and intriguing to the point where you are forced while I'm talking to say, what is an Orisha? What are they talking about? How is that? How is it that I'm this old and I don't know what it is? Rather than me tell you, I want you to hear from them.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going back to a performance that happened when I was playing with this band for the first time. It was probably about 4 years ago. And we invoked Oshun and Alegba. right? so, so I'm playing the piano. I'm playing the song Footprints, a Wayne Shorter tune, and I'm playing out of my mind. I'm having this out of
Yeah.
body experience. It's like, what just happened? You
Yeah.
know? And so
Yeah.
now, as I look back on that and I look to now, and I see that this is something that happens with regularity. I mean, it happened last Sunday. It was my birthday, and I'm playing in my gallery performance venue, and my hand just started doing something that it had never done before. And when I look back at it, I'm like, what just happened?
So
And
now you know when I say when I'm in Brazil and all of a sudden I'm knowing and and then it's like, okay, I gotta write. And then the next thing you know, I'm writing, and then that's that. Yeah.
yeah.
There's a really good Disney movie right now, and I want to call it Spirit. I don't know what the name of it is. It's about a black jazz musician. Have you
So
seen that?
I haven't seen it. I've heard,
So
yeah,
it talks about getting caught in that place, and being in that place, and some people get so lost in that place they have to be brought back. Somebody has to find them. You should really watch that. I watched it with my granddaughter and my daughter-in-law, and then I turned it on again, and I was like, they didn't put this movie out. They didn't. Did they put this out for people to see and know? It's like, ooh, yeah, you'll love that. You'll love it because it's not, we keep saying in this Christian world, Judeo-Christian world, life is eternal, but we're clinging to this like there's nothing else. And there's so much more.
yeah. Um, since you brought that up, let's talk about the importance of narratives because we're seeing more and more coming from us. You know, we go back a few years and we talk about the fact that we don't have adequate representation in Hollywood and we don't have adequate acknowledgement of what we bring, and we've been struggling with this whole idea that someone else has been telling our story and we're not telling it enough. But the narrative is so important. And I can speak for myself. I'm very deliberate about giving people other stories, to combat the whole idea that we're shiftless, we're lazy, we're criminals, we're all those things that we get demonized for, yet everybody in the world want to be like us.
Yeah,
So
I think it was Du Bois who said, "We the people." Maybe it was Du Bois. Maybe it was Frantz Fanon who said, "We're the people who are culturally esteemed and yet socially despised."
yes,
Um, and so um, Toni Morrison said it this way: "It is the task of the oppressed to teach the oppressor." And the first time I heard that, I was like, Toni Morrison need to leave me alone because I'm sick of teaching them. They need to get their own books. And then it was like, well, yeah, but if they write the book about you, how can somebody else write your book? We have to, whether it's through self-publishing or through storytelling, which is what I really recommend on a daily basis, that you just say to somebody, tell me a story about your sneakers. And then they'll tell you a story about their sneakers. Well, I saw these sneakers, I was walking, I wanted these sneakers, and I thought about, we're connected for the narrative, and yet we don't hear it enough. That's the piece that I'm walking into with television, is to create a space that's not in your face going, look, 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 black people do good stuff too. But it's just saying these are regular folk, and we don't see this enough. And the more we see of this, the less likely you are to think of this one narrative that's been playing over and over and over again.
hmm. Okay, so we've been here for about an hour, and I definitely want to be respectful of your time. You have had such an amazing depth of experiences. You casually mentioned, well, I was in Bahia, Brazil. You lived in San Diego. You're in Savannah now, and a very holy place from my perspective. But I could have you all day, and I know I don't just want to take up too much of your time. But
Oh
I
no,
do
we're
want to
good.
give you an opportunity to talk about the things that you're doing now. You mentioned that you have a television show that's about the break. What other
Yeah, I'm
kind?
not saying too much about it because
Yeah, right,
I am a spiritual person.
right.
And
So,
I know how that works.
right.
So I'm not saying too much about that, but I'm
Okay.
working with some others that are building a conference for story here in Savannah from the Savannah Institute for Story. I'm always lecturing with companies and corporations around things of purpose and diversity and inclusion, but organization as well and structure. I'm always doing that. I share a story every single day on social media. I'm always writing. I have two books that will be out soon: Beauty Thieves and Black World, um, and and some books that are going to be turned into a movie soon. So that's pretty cool.
Okay. Well, I'm going to utilize this for the radio show. We've got it at 56 minutes, and that'll give me time to drop in some PSAs so I can honor the station and give them their time as well. Bertice, it has been an absolute pleasure to join you today and to have this conversation. I
Did
did.
you actually call Oshun and then sit at a piano? Like, what are you, crazy?
It happened. And it is one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And I have the video to prove it so I can look back at that
I'm
moment.
sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I'm blessed. I'll share this with you and then I'll go. I stood on the beach next to the Elmina slave dungeon
Mm,
and I tossed my orange out into the water and I had my conversation with the ancestors. And I
mm,
told the ancestors that I want to be a conduit. I want to bring Africa to Africans in America.
mm,
And that night, I got an inbox from Dr. Runoko Rashidi, who said that
mm.
he wanted me to bring him to Cleveland.
Wow.
So since that
Yeah.
day, I have traveled with him to Egypt and Sudan. We spent 3 weeks together. The last night I was there, I slept on the desert in Merowe, next
Mm,
to one of the oldest pyramid
mm, mm,
complexes on the continent.
mm.
So it is very real.
Yeah.
It's very real.
Yeah.
And and all
Yeah.
I can say is if you don't have an understanding of the ancestors, please do what you can to connect because they will
Yeah.
empower you and they will lift you up.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that I could say. Other people understand and use our that energy for their power. And it is time that we reclaim it, not from a narrative or a place of pain and sadness and loss. And I don't want to see any more of that, but from a place of hope and inspiration and aspiration that they are still here and they are still with us and they are still encouraging us on.
Mhm.
So that part, I would show you this room. There's a sarcophagus in the corner that's actually a bookcase that houses. But there's like my family make masks, and so this is like a clutter place that I don't sit in. Um, and those books are first edition books by and about Black people. I collect documents and anything from the period of enslavement. Those are around, and then there's the art um, that's all around. And we don't when we don't know ourselves, then somebody else is benefiting from the power of that, and it's up to us. It's incumbent upon us to reclaim our truth.
Absolutely. Well, great words to part and close with. And thank you. I
Thank
was
you.
really excited about having this conversation with you, and it definitely exceeded my expectations. I will have to do more homework on you for the next conversation because there's just so much to know about you, and I think people need to know. But I also want to say and this comes from the bottom of my heart, that you radiate beauty.
Oh, thank you. Thank
You
you.
know, and your smile is something on its own can inspire people. So thank you for being
Wow.
the inspiration that you are, and continued success and blessings to you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Vince. I really appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So with that, I will say, know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, and make today your best day.
That
Peace.
part.